think I'm getting pretty good about remembering to turn it off, so as well. All right. I also just want to invite us to come back to that meditation if there are any questions when we enter the discussion section. Tonight, I titled the talk, Mindfulness is Not a Hobby. And I began thinking about this because of my own practice, honestly. But I think that it's not only me, I think that many of us come to mindfulness with the intention to learn something new, much like a hobby, or maybe a new method of exercise, something that we can do. We can do it periodically. We can squeeze it in between meetings. We can even do it daily. But many of us, if not most of us, I think begin this path by treating mindfulness as something that we can pick up and put down, as opposed to maybe like a value or a way that we are, that we live each day. And when we stay in this frame of mind, of mindfulness as something we do, we miss so much of the power of mindfulness. So before we go further, I want to just invite you into a short contemplation. So I would just ask for you just to sit back and if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes as a way to access your own internal experience. And just ask yourself, how am I relating to mindfulness today, now? Am I relating to mindfulness as something to do or as a way of being? And just allow whatever arises to be known. And we'll just allow whatever began to percolate just to continue to kind of hover there and be known as we move into more about this and then in our conversation. When we move to understand mindfulness as a way of being, I think we open up to a new way of relating to everything, to others, to experience, to life, and maybe most importantly, to our own mind and heart. Something happens internally when we shift from the mind state of doing to the mind state of being. Being has depth and breadth. It seems to transcend situations and loses its dependency on the external world. As mindfulness becomes the way we are, it travels with us wherever we go, from person to person, from situation to situation. As a way of being, we're committed to being mindful. I think there's a commitment there. And if I may, to just use an analogy of romantic relationships, it's like moving from casual dating to marriage. In casual dating, we may think about the person periodically, but we don't remember them in our decision making necessarily, big or small. We don't consider their place in our lives as we make major moves They don't permeate our consciousness. But with marriage or with the commitment of raising children, two-legged or four-legged, wherever commitment is, you no longer move through life with only a consciousness of your own needs and wants. There's more to consider in this shared life. And we can actually approach mindfulness like this. We make a commitment to mindful living. And as we do, there's an increased seriousness about our intention. This intention to pay attention to what's here, what's arising, what's happening internally and externally, with a new sense of diligence and a kind of watchful care. And as we understand the roots of mindfulness, the moral ethic of non-harming that is at the core of this practice, the development of compassion is also ushered in. As mindfulness becomes a way of being, mindfulness and compassion are no longer separated. And compassion is what arises as we see more clearly our own minds and hearts. Through our commitment to mindfulness, there's a turning inward that results in this clear seeing that awakens us to what judgment feels like. For example, what comparison feels like, and how often our own stress comes from not accepting our own conditioning, not accepting others and the world around us. Compassion develops toward ourselves when we see and hear clearly the ways we treat ourselves poorly, the ways we castigate, judge, demand that we be different. And as we develop this tenderness toward ourselves, we also tend to develop it toward others. And through our commitment to mindful speech, mindful action, and the developing compassion, it really becomes important not to harm others with our words and actions. And with mindful listening, we hear more clearly. We bring great seriousness to the practice of differentiating our own stories from what another person is actually saying. Our listening even becomes compassionate. And all of this relates deeply to mindfulness of the mind. After years of committing to mindfulness as a way of life, I still wake up so often to the way that my mind narrates life that isn't the way it actually is. You know, our stories have layers and layers of conditionality. As humans, we've been perfecting the ways we protect ourselves for so long that most often they are deeply embedded in the way we also see ourselves and we see the world. When we're committed to living mindfully, we can be really curious about the way the mind creates our own reality, narrates constantly, and erects these protective barriers that end up keeping others out. And we don't have to take it personal, like as in a personal failure, but we can see the capability of the human mind, that each day it's the mind that actually creates the world of experience. So I thought I would share a recent example that actually just happened yesterday, in fact. I have a very dear friend who's been my friend for many years, and she's much like a sister, or as an only child, what I imagine a sister might be like. But she's in my most inner circle of trusted friends, and she's someone that my spouse and I consider family. So she's very dear to me. And she's recently begun dating again. And I've notice that each time she talks about this new person that she's fond of and has begun exploring a relationship with, oddly, my heart contracts a little bit. And I find like vague judgment arising in my mind about this person. Mind you, the person that I've actually never met, know nothing about really, except for through my dear friend. But nevertheless, I noticed this judgment arising. And yesterday, I could actually hear the thoughts. There's something about this person I don't like. I'm not sure I trust her. So, my dear friend and I were on the phone yesterday, and she began to tell me this latest story about a connection that she had with her. And the judgment again started to arise. And I even said out loud, I don't know. I'm not sure I trust her. And, my dear friend's speech pattern changed right after that statement. She clearly became a bit self protective, even though it was mild. And I paused and I turned the gaze toward my own mind instead of toward this person that I actually don't know. And then I honestly said to her that I didn't know at that moment. I didn't understand my own reaction, but that I was committed to looking at it. And I apologized. And conversation, for the most part, easily moved on. But with this commitment to living mindfully, being mindful, I returned to the conversation that was now left only in my mind. Well, most likely in her mind too, but it was no longer alive in the intersubjective space. And I didn't do what would have been so easy to do. Had mindfulness just been something I do periodically, I would have moved on. I would have considered it finished. I would have distracted with some new experiences. And I didn't want to do that. That's not living mindfully. I allow my commitment to living mindfully to stay front and center. And so I sat and I felt the judgment and I heard the inner dialogue. I don't really trust that woman. And then I heard the other familiar voice. Why are you being so judgmental, Stephanie? You're always so judgmental. This is one of the worst parts about you. And then I paused again. And I turned toward my heart. And I made some space for some compassion. And I realized that's not true. I'm actually not always judgmental. That's an old story. And there was the compassion. And with that compassion, there was the ability to acknowledge, though, there was judgment here. And what was that about? What was happening? Was I fearful of losing my friend? And I sat and asked that question. And of course, the resounding answer was yes. And I sat with that. Yuck. And as I sat and continued to turn toward it, that awareness of the old belief that love is a zero-sum game, there's only enough for few, it's not abundant, was right there, still operating. And as I mindfully made more and more contact with my own heart, there was something else. There was the abundance in my own heart that I felt was possible. And I felt the love for my friend and the truth of my desire for her to be happy and fulfilled in this life just rose to the forefront. This mindfulness of the mind and mindfulness of the body, so intimately connected with mindfulness of relationships. This human mind is the pass-through for every experience, from washing the dishes to having a big life-altering conversation. Everything that is experienced must pass through this mind. It makes perfect sense why it behooves us to bring mindfulness here. And I'm sure that we are all still deeply aware of the outpouring of grief and sorrow that are continuing in the aftermath of the most recent deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And the changing tide that seems possible as protests grow larger and larger, as more and more Black and brown and white bodies join together to hopefully continue to make these desperately long overdue needed changes to increase justice for all. It's on this larger cultural level that mindfulness of the mind and mindfulness of the body are also so important. It isn't just our most intimate relationships. How we engage with our own mind and heart also has direct impact on how we engage in what's happening on this larger scale relational front. It's all relational. As each of us engage in this commitment to living mindful, we wake up to our own conditioning, to the way that white body supremacy has been passed down to each of us, how it has developed in our own minds, our own hearts and bodies. And it's only with mindfulness, this deep commitment to awareness, that we can begin to know our own mind here so that we can shape it. That's the way it happens. We know the mind so that we can shape the mind so that we can end suffering. And we shape it with compassion and a commitment to justice for all. And so that our words and actions can flow from this place, can flow for the good of all, as opposed to just some. So I don't know, but for those of us who perhaps unconsciously or unknowingly have continued to relate to mindfulness as something we do periodically, I can think of no better time and no better reason to deepen our commitment to living mindfully, to being mindful, to waking up each day and inviting mindfulness to be our partner, to walk side by side with us, to lead us in every interaction, and to help us slow down, to help us recognize that when we move fast, there is so much we miss, including our own intentions and motivations that guide our every word and every action. As we deepen our commitment to being mindful, we also commit to being a source of care, compassion, and love in this world. And just imagine if every one of us did this. So I want to end tonight actually with a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, and it's called Shoulders. It's so beautiful, and it speaks to this. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him, no car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say, "Fragile, handle with care." His ears fill up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling. So let's just sit for a few moments and let these words be digested and pay attention to what arises in the body, what arises in the mind. So let's sit. Thank you for your attention. And